B'Shem Hashem na'aseh v'natzliach. Welcome everyone to our weekly Zera Shimshon shiur on the Parasha. Tonight's Parasha is Parashat Vayakhel. We're going to be doing the Zera Shimshon Ot Gimel, the third ma'amar of the Zera Shimshon. V'ezrat Hashem, this shiur is dedicated for the refuah shalem of kol chole am Yisrael, especially those that are injured in Israel this week. May Hashem give them refuat hanefesh, refuat hakuf. It's also le'ilui nishmat Zera Shimshon, Harav Shimshon Chaim ben Nachman Michael. May his zichut be a melitz yosher for all of Am Yisrael. Amen. Keni ratzon. So, the parasha this week, Parashat Vayakhel, talks about a few things. One of the mitzvot that we hear about in this week's parasha is the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos, Shabbat. I don't think that we truly understand the value of Shabbat all in all and the importance of Shabbat. I think if you would take the entire Torah and you would try to analyze as to what mitzvah is the greatest mitzvah in the entire Torah, you would probably find yourself coming back to Shabbat. The most important mitzvah of the Torah is Shabbat. It is mentioned numerous times in the Torah about keeping Shabbat in numerous ways. The absolute only thing that overrides Shabbat is human life, saving a life. As I mentioned this past Shabbat, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, build a Mishkan for me. And right after he says, build me a Mishkan, says, and you shall not work on Shabbat. Keep the Shabbat. Why are these two connected? Because Hashem was telling Bnei Israel, even when it comes to you building my home, once it's Shabbat, stop. Not even my sanctuary is important enough compared to Shabbat. Shabbat, you need to stop. It is basically what makes the Jewish world go around. And unfortunately, and I'll say unfortunately again, because many Jews in the world have not tapped in, have not been able to, or don't understand enough to be able to tap into this wonderful gift of Shabbat. Not only in the physical terms is it a gift, but also in the spiritual terms. In the physical terms, I mean, no one can argue, right? We have a day of rest no matter what. It gives us time to be with our families. It gives us time to recharge. It gives us time to be with our own thoughts. It gives us time to recollect ourselves and go forward again. I could not, for the life of me, I could not imagine a life without Shabbat. I cannot. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how people use their phones on Shabbat. I don't know how you could not disconnect for one day from your phone. And the only thing that I see is that because they've never done it, they don't know. They think it's normal. But once you stay away from the phone for a few weeks, oh, you'll see. Like, it's crazy. It's a different world. You realize, am I right? Like, you've experienced it. Like, now, is it hard for you to put your phone away? No, it's like you can't wait on Friday to turn it off. It's incredible, right? First you're like, I can't put it away, but then after a few weeks you're like, and I have this experience in Israel whenever we have our Israel trips. Many of the kids in our group decide on their own that they wanna just unplug. Because you're in Yerushalayim or you're in Tzfat, it's like the aura around you, everything shuts down. You almost feel like, why wouldn't I? You go out in the street and there's no cars. Everyone's walking with their children in the streets. So when they unplug, and almost every single one of them tells you afterwards, that experience was incredible to be able to just with no shame, just put the phone away and not go back. It's an amazing experience. But that's the physical aspect of Shabbat. But there is a huge spiritual aspect of Shabbat, which is a connection between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem, in His wisdom, has said that Shabbat, Ot hi beni ubenechem. It is a sign between me and you. Only me and you. Nobody else. As we've said before, Shabbat is only given to Am Yisrael. right? It is not given to any other nation other than Jews. Because it's our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the one thing that we have with Him. However, the Zera Shimshon is going to bring something out today that I thought was very interesting. Obviously. It's funny, by the way, I want to just give a shout out to all those that listen to the Shiurim. I love hearing their comments, and when they approach me, they see me, it's just incredible. Like I heard from some people again this week as they were talking about the Zera Shimshon Shiurim, and they're like, the craziest thing about it is that every week it's something new that you never thought about ever. You've never heard before. It's just very unique ideas. And I thought this was definitely one of them. This week's Parasha was definitely one of them. So here we go. The Zera Shimshon says, the Pasuk in Shemot Lamed Hey Gimel, Pasuk 35, chapter 35, Pasuk Gimel. It says, it's the famous Pasuk about kindling a fire on Shabbos. Lo teva'aru esh bechol moshevodechem beyom HaShabbat. You shall not kindle a fire in all of your dwellings on the day of Shabbat. Now we have to understand, the language of this pasuk is a little bit peculiar here. Why does it say do not light a fire in any of your dwellings? Right? Just say, Lo teva'aru esh b'yom HaShabbat. Do not kindle a fire on Shabbat. Have you ever thought of that? Are you allowed to light a fire on Shabbat or not? No. You're not. So that's what the Torah should say. Do not light a fire on Shabbat. Simple. But it says, Lo teva'aru esh bechol moshevotechem. In any of your dwellings, do not light a fire. So Chachamim, there are these messages that are learned about Shalom Bayit, for instance, about anger, in your home, which is your moshav. Lo teva'aru esh, don't bring anger in because that's going to destroy your Shalom Bayit. All these things. However, we have to understand the simple meaning of it also. What's the simple meaning of the pasuk? It says, we have to understand, Shepasak HaRambam, the Rambam, the Maimonides, has a psak halacha in the second perek of Halachot Shabbat. V'zeh leshono, and this is how the Rambam puts it. Hamhalech bamidbar, if a person is going in the desert, velo yada madai hu Shabbat, and he does not know when Shabbat is. Lo alenu bar minan, the guy is lost. And he's found himself in the desert. He wakes up, he doesn't know what day it is. I don't know, a shipwreck. And he's on an island. Comes out on the island, and he doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know where he is. He lost his map, and so on and so forth. He's clueless. By the way, I told you guys the story about the guy that was found on the island. There was a guy that was found on an island. He was lost on an island for many, many years. He was found there after many years, and he had survived. So naturally, there was like news reporters and everything on the island trying to see, like, what'd you do? Shlomi's been found after 30 years on this island. So he goes, let me show you around. I'll show you. So he takes him around to different, he built himself a hut out of wood. It's like, I had to learn. Believe me, I did not know how to build. I had to learn it. You learn, So he shows him this hut, and he shows him this place. He says, this is where I slept. This is where I went to the bathroom. This is where... And he takes him to another place. He says, this is the synagogue. He built himself a nice, beautiful synagogue, right? And they see inside. He goes, okay, let me show you the next thing. They go to another place, and he says, this is another synagogue. So they go, hold on, Shlomi, are there any other people here? He says, no, it's just me. Questions later. So they go further. He shows them some other stuff, and then they go to another place, and he says, this place is also a synagogue that I built. Now, 3 synagogues, one guy lost on an island for 30 years. So they go, so Mr. Shlomi, if we may ask, so what's with the 3 synagogues? There's nobody else around. They wanted to know. The guy lost his mind. Who is he taking to synagogue with him? So he says, I built these two synagogues because whenever I get into a fight in this one, I go to the other one. When I get into a fight in this one, I go to that one. He goes, so what's the third one? He goes, so I wouldn't be even caught dead in that one. Right? Which is obviously very familiar to, it's like, it is the story of unfortunately the Jewish world. It's always like, where do you go to shul? I go to this, I go to that. My shul is, anyway.
Not for me.
Yeah, it's just not my vibe. Today it's like, it's not my vibe, I don't know. The Kiddush club can be better. That place gives tongue on a weekly basis. This place, hot dogs in a blanket. I don't know. Anyway, so this guy is found on an island, the Rambam says, and he doesn't know what day of the week it is. So he says, Moneh miyom sheta'ah, he starts counting from the day that he became confused, like you are right now. He counts from the day that he was confused. And he counts how many days? He counts 6 days. Kadesh et hayom hashavi'i, and he makes the 7th day kadosh. So imagine, doesn't matter. The Rambam says don't matter what day it is. It could be Tuesday. But he doesn't know it's Tuesday. So what does he do? On that Tuesday he goes, okay. Like many people out there that make up their own religions, right? Today is Sunday. Right? And he starts counting Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the 7th day will be Shabbat. Right? So listen to the language of the Rambam. You count from the day that you were confused. Count the day that you messed up. So it could be Yom Shishi, it could be Friday. But because you don't know it's Friday, you count 6 days, and on the 7th day it's going to be Shabbat. Right? So now, it don't end there though. It don't end there. Uvchol yom vayom, and every single day of those 7 days, va'afilu b'yom zeh shemekadesh u'mavdil bo. So he says, what does he do? Every single day he says kiddush, and he makes havdalah. Why? Because it's shafek Shabbat. That day could be Shabbat. Now you're counting your 7 days, fine. You have a day that you know is Shabbat, that's fine. But every other day, also, you have to count as a Safek Shabbat. Listen, what does that mean? And he says, even on the day that is your Shabbat, though, even on the day that you counted as your Shabbat, on the 7th day that you counted, mutar lo la'asot melacha keder parnasato. He is allowed to do melacha for his safety, for his life. Meaning on all of these days, he's allowed to be breaking Shabbat because it's his life. He's in a desert. He's in a forest. He's in a jungle. Wherever. He's lost. Right? So for his survival, he's allowed to break Shabbat. However, in a minimal sense. But every single day yet has to be treated as a Safek Shabbat, a questionable Shabbat. And then his Shabbat could be on a Tuesday, as far as he knows. He's counting. Well, what does he know? He's counting his 7 days. Kedei shelo yamut, so that he does not perish. Chas v'shalom. Ad kal neshalom. Until here is the Rambam. If you thought the Rambam wasn't incredible, now you know. The Rambam was incredible. So now the Zera Shimshon comes in. He says, V'zeh lo teva'aru b'chol moshevotechem b'yom HaShabbat. This is, he says, look at how he reads into the words. I love it. It's so interesting. He says, this is why the Pasuk says, do not kindle a fire anywhere b'chol moshevotechem, in your dwellings. Which means what? Kelomar, b'chol moshevotechem, in your dwellings, in the cities that you live in. If you're confused in the city that you live in as to what day it is, check yourself in. Because in a city, everybody knows what day it is. I don't think in any city or any country, any one nation ever got up and said, what day is it today? Right? Never happens because somebody knows what day it is. Everybody knows what day it is. Right? So he says, in your cities, in your dwellings, you can never kindle a light. And you're not allowed to do any other melachot b'yom HaShabbat, on the day of Shabbat. Because the isur of hav'ara, the isur of lighting a fire, is only in your dwellings. Meaning, it is only where there is regular life, so to speak. You have a community, you're in your city, you're with your family. Not when you're lost and there's no one around. Nobody knows who you are. There's no one there to know who you are. Right? You're all alone. There is no city. You don't know what day it is. Then your survival will come first. Therefore, because this is pikuach nefesh, aval, im tihya bamidbar, az titztarech la'avir esh af b'Shabbat. When you're in a desert, you're going to need to light a fire, even on Shabbat. It's your survival. It's going to go to freezing degrees at night, and you're going to need to light a fire, right? Kedei la'asot parnasatcha, in order to be able to live. So he says, ve'efshar, therefore, it is possible. Shelazer ramaz hakatuv ba'omro. This is what the pasuk meant in the Torah, where it says, Sheshet yamim ta'avod va'asita kol melachtecha. 6 days work, 6 days work, va'asita kol melachtecha, and do all of your work, creativity. V'yom ha'shivi'i Shabbat la'Hashem, and on the 7th day is a Shabbat Hashem, for Hashem your God. Do not do melacha. So to say, kol zeman shebesheshet yamim tuchal la'asod kol melachtecha, any time that there is a possibility in those 6 days for you to do your work, meaning he's saying, anytime you know when the 6 days are, that you're allowed to do work, meaning, you know today's Sunday, you know tomorrow's Monday, you know the next day is Tuesday. When you're in a situation that you know the days of the week, te'aseh melacha, then you're allowed to do your work. You can do whatever you need to do during the days of the week. On the 7th day Shabbat, lo ta'aseh melacha, do not do any work. Aval, however, when you are lost in a desert, you can't do all your work on those 6 days. Kol melachtecha, all of your work. Why not? As we said, when he starts counting the 6 days from whatever day he started when he was confused, did we say he can do whatever he wants? He can't do kol melacha. He can, every single day is considered Shabbat. It's a safek Shabbat. It's a questionable Shabbat. He's counting in his mind as if today is Sunday, but who said? It could be Shabbat. So the only work he's allowed to do or she's allowed to do in the desert is things of survival. You need to light a fire, light a fire. You need to kill an animal, kill an animal. You need to uproot something from a tree, you do it for your survival. But other extra things, there is no extra thing. Everything is your survival right now. You're trying to survive. Right? So he says, in that sense, you're not allowed to do everything. Therefore, when it says, work 6 days and do all of your work, it's only talking when you're in a place where you could do all of your work every day of the week except for Shabbat. Here, you can't do all of your work every day of the week in a desert. Because every day when you're lost and you don't know what day it is, every day is considered Shabbat in a sense. As af bayom ha-shibi'i, in that sense, even on the 7th day, according to your calculations, lo tuchal lishmor, you can't really keep Shabbat. Even if you think it's Shabbat, you still can't keep it fully. Lo ta'aseh kol melacha mipnei she'af be'oto hayom titztarech la'asot melacha. Even on that day, you're obligated to do melacha. Even on that day, unfortunately, you're incapable of keeping Shabbat. So that pasuk cannot be referring to somebody that's not in a moshav, that is not situated in a city. Therefore, the Zera Shimshon has a beautiful way of looking at this pasuk. Very technical, very simple, but technical. The Zera Shimshon is basically saying, when the Torah says, Lo teva'aru esh bechol moshevotechem, do not light a fire in any of your dwellings, It's literally talking about your dwellings. Because when you're dwelling surrounded by people, you know when Shabbat is, therefore, Tevaru Esh, lighting of kindling of fire is Asur. However, saving a life is different. So therefore, when Chas v'Shalom, someone's lost in a desert, and there is no other way of survival other than breaking Shabbat, and it's no longer a moshav, it's no longer a city, you're no longer with other people, therefore the pasuk is not forcing you not to light a fire. It's telling you over there, you're allowed to light a fire.
What if you are with a group of people?
And if you know what day it is, then you're good.
But every day it's a survival day.
But what it is saying is that what it means by a moshav is that you're not lost in a desert. Moshav means a dwelling.
Right.
You have a community. It's a set,
But what if a group of people got lost in the desert?
They would have the same exact halachot.
As if this was just one.
Yeah, it wouldn't make a difference because they're all confused. They wouldn't know. If somehow they have if they knew, then they keep the regular Shabbat.
But they're still in the desert, so they don't have the means to keep a regular Shabbat.
So it's not. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that this is not referring to that kind of a person. It's referring to a person that Rambam is referring to in his halachot, that a person's actually lost. He doesn't know what day it is.
So if you know what day it is,
So if you know what day it is,
I need to light the fire because I'm gonna.
then if you're still allowed to light a fire in that sense,
Yeah.
right? But in that situation, you don't have to keep every day as Shabbat.
I see now.
You understand what I'm saying? That's the difference. The person that's lost has to look at every single day in a sense as Shabbat. The only things that he can do is for survival. As opposed to someone that's lost, but he does know what day of the week it is, he can comfortably do anything he wants every single day except the Shabbat.
Right.
And then on Shabbat, only what he needs to be done, light a fire, hunt, whatever it is, he'll be able to do. It just, I want to go back on the beauty of Shabbat. On the beauty of Shabbat. I don't know if you guys were here on Shabbat when I spoke about the cab driver that Rabbi Sparrow, who's a writer, was telling the story about the cab driver. Were you here on Shabbat? I'm going to say it again anyway. You were here on Shabbat?
I think I heard you say it before.
I'm going to say it for Gabby. I'm going to say it for Gabby.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Sparrow was traveling back to the States from Eretz Yisrael, and he wanted to make one last trip to the Kotel, like we always do. We want our last stop to be by the Kotel, just to say, see you later. Hashem, help me come live here, please. I beg you. Think about it. When was the last time you were at the Kotel and you actually davened and you said, Hashem, please rebuild this temple so I don't have to ever go back anywhere else? It would be a powerful tefillah. That's what we should really daven at the Kotel. So he wanted to go daven, and he gets himself a cab. Now he's on the way to the airport. He asks the cab driver to take him to the Kotel, but now he has all of his luggage, and he doesn't know what to do. He decides he wants to tell the cab driver to wait for him outside, but he's got all of his belongings. He doesn't know. He trusts him not. The cabbie that picks him up is some guy with a shaved head. What does he know? So he decides. He says, "Can you wait for me?" The guy says, "Sure, I'll wait for you." Right? So he still takes his laptop and some of his expensive stuff with him, right? Things that he can't replace so easily. He goes and davens and cries, and he comes back, and the cabbie's waiting there. And as they're driving, the cabbie sees how much he's cried. He says, "It's amazing, no?" He's like, he says, I answered, I said, "Yeah, it's definitely, it's breathtaking, the Kotel, something." He says, "You know what else is unbelievable? Shabbat." That's what the cab driver says. He says, "Shabbat yakar meod." Shabbat is very precious. So I'm sitting there thinking this guy's telling me about how yakar Shabbat is. I want to hear this guy's story. So he tells him his story. He says he used to live in the States for 20 years, the cab driver, both New York and California. When he started out, he was penniless. He was working for a furniture company, and it was owned by two partners, both Jewish, right? A Brazilian, I think, Jew and an Israeli Jew. And he was getting, some kind of salary and I guess commission by selling stuff. He was a salesperson for a furniture company. Says it came few months, and these guys, the partners, came to him and said to him, "Listen, we're going to start having the offices open on Shabbat, so we need you to come in on Shabbat." He's like, "I heard this. I was taken so aback. Like, how could one Jew ask another Jew to break Shabbat? Like, I've never, Shabbat is so important. Why would you work on Shabbat?" And I was so hurt by it. So I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't work on Shabbats. They're like, "Okay, you don't work on Shabbat, you're fired. We don't need you." And they fired me on the spot. It's like, I was really hurt. I went to Williamsburg to a client of mine. He wanted to possibly see if that guy will give him a job, a religious Jew. So the religious Jew sits down with him and says, "Tell me, why did they get rid of you?" He says, "Listen, to be honest with you, they wanted me to work on Shabbat. I didn't want to work on Shabbat, so they fired me." He goes, "They fired you because you wanted to not work on Shabbat? It's ridiculous." He's like, "If that's what they did, I'm never doing business with the company again." That was a big blow, because his account was $50,000 a month that he was bringing in, right? That's like over $500,000, over $500,000 a year. Calls the company and he says, "I'm cutting ties with you guys because so-and-so told me that you fired him because of Shabbat. No longer going to work with you guys." It doesn't take too long for them to call him back and say, "You're rehired and you don't have to work on Shabbat." Just to keep that client. She says, "So they hired me back. I'm working. Within 9 months, all of what I'm about to tell you happened within 9 months after I got rehired. A few months after that, one of the partners sold his share. This Brazilian, I think, partner sold his share to the Israeli partner, right? A month passed, the Israeli partner didn't want to have the entire share of the company. So he came and offered half of the share to me. To which I replied, I can't afford it. How am I going to buy a company? Half a company. So he said, I'll make you a deal. We'll be partners, and whatever money you make right now until you buy the half of the company, I take 50%. 50% of your profits is mine until you buy half the company from me. I agreed. Within a few months, not only did I buy my share already, I bought his share, and I became a sole owner of the entire company. Within 9 months, I own my own furniture company. It's like, that was 20 years ago. I still own the company now. My children run it. And I go back and forth, I guess, collect my money whenever I want. I am extremely wealthy. I only drive a cab as a hobby. Imagine that. Cab driver as a hobby. All why? Because he wanted to keep Shabbat. Because he wanted to keep Shabbat. And so many of us, unfortunately, do not know the value of Shabbat. We think Shabbat is like, some of us think like Shabbat's like, It's like I don't understand how people sometimes, I understand that schedules could be very, very tight at work, especially when people work for other people, right? But sometimes I don't understand how people that work for themselves, they have their own hours, and they're in their offices or in their businesses till like last seconds. We're like, I didn't have time to shave, because like I got clients, and I had to make it to shul, right? You would never, ever catch that same guy, unfortunately, at a wedding, unshaved like that, saying, I had a client, couldn't shave. No, you wouldn't, because they'll manage, right? When it comes to Shabbat, sometimes we don't see the value of it. Shabbat is Ot Hi Beni Uven Bnei Israel. It's the sign between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And further on, the Zera Shimshon goes on to say how if we had the zechut of the first Shabbat that Am Yisrael would have kept together, the sin of the Chet HaEgel, which still has remnants in our exile till today, would have fully been extinguished, would have fully been forgiven, and we would have never suffered the things that we have suffered. Because keeping Shabbat as a nation together overrides all the avarot of Am Yisrael. It says, the Gemara in Shabbat says, a person that keeps Shabbat, even if they do Ovdei Avodah Zara, if they worshipped idols, it's completely forgiven. If we only had that Shabbat, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. And as Gemara Shabbat says, if we keep 2 Shabbats, Mashiach would come.
You're saying as a nation.
As a nation. If we all keep 2 Shabbats, Mashiach would come. And we can't say like, okay, Allah, what's going to happen if I don't keep this Shabbat? I'm sure there's somebody else that's not keeping Shabbat also. So like, but you don't know that. So if a person doesn't keep Shabbat, that person has to point to themselves and say, Bishvili, because of me, Mashiach didn't come this week. I'm sorry, it's a little bit direct, but if a person doesn't keep Shabbat, it's that person to blame. Every person is responsible. So it's like that mashal they give, that a city wanted to, the king was going to visit the city, and they wanted to honor him, so they bring a huge keg out in the middle of the city, and they said, everyone chip in wine, we'll pour wine, and so when the king comes, we'll have wine for everyone. Everyone puts a little bit, by the time the king comes, it'll be a huge keg of wine. So, there was a like a Baal Chanut, like a store owner, regular store owner. He says, listen, I don't got like that much, like what does it mean if I bring wine? Everybody's got wine like me. No, so he brings water, puts water in the keg. And he says, it won't believe me, no one's gonna taste the water, no one's even gonna know, because there's gonna be so much wine in there, no one's gonna notice the difference, right? No one's gonna be like, oh, one person didn't bring wine. Comes the king, they open the keg, clear water comes out. Oh, what happened? Turns out everybody in the city thought the same thing. No one's going to notice. I'll put water, Allah, he'll put. Asqar will put wine. Turns out Asqar didn't put wine. He also put water. Jamshid was thinking David's going to put wine. But you know what? David also put water. So between Asqar, Jamshid, and David, it was a keg full of water, right? And that's the same thing when it comes to everyday mitzvot that we have to do together. Don't think, if I don't do it, someone else will. Someone else won't. Like that big tzaddik, I don't remember one of the chachamim, it was on the day of Purim. They find him on Purim, when everyone's dancing and drinking, he's learning Torah. They come to him and they say, Kvod Harav, why don't you? He says, I felt like if everybody's dancing, who's learning Torah? Who's keeping the world running? I was so terrified, I had to sit down and learn. That's keeping the world going. That's the person that keeps the world going, to feel the responsibility of, there has to be people keeping Shabbat, there has to be people learning Torah, and if we just knew the value, we ourselves would be just that much more valuable in our own eyes and in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's eyes. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, amen, amen.